Welcome to our conversation today. My name is Gulan Ahmed, and I'm the library director at the American University of Kurdistan. Today we have an award-winning author of a book called Daughters of Smoke and Fire. Ava Homa, thank you very much for joining us. I will continue introducing you. Ava Homa is not only an author, but also speaker, activist, as well as a faculty member at the California State University. Monterey Bay. Her work has been incorporated into universities curricula at different institutions such as George Mason University, the University of Toronto, Southern Methodist University, and also in different settings across America and Europe. Homa's work, Homa has delivered speeches on writing as resistance, human rights, gender equity, Kurdish affairs, media literacy, and other topics. I would also like to highlight this novel has been awarded international awards, including the 2020 National Silver Book Award for fiction, as well as it was featured by Roxane Gay's book club, and also the Unplot book box and Women for Women International. And it also earned a place among the best books in outlets such as Wall Street Journal and the Independent UK. Congratulations, Ava, for being the first Kurdish female writing a novel in English. I would like to give you the stage to tell us about yourself and what was your path, or I would say turning point for you to decide to become an author and your path to publication.
Thank you, Galan. I'm delighted to be speaking with you. Thanks to AUK Library for holding this event and inviting me. I am honored to be speaking to you and Professor Aghapour and Hilton and all of you guys that I've been in touch with over the past couple of weeks. So this is a true honor for me to address Kurdish students, young Kurds. I think of myself and my writing as basically planting olive trees, in the sense that literature takes a very long time to bear fruit, just like olive trees, but I do it for the following generation, for the young Kurds. So now to have this opportunity to face them and speak to them is so special for me. It's such an honor. To answer your question about what motivated me to become a writer, if I got your question right, it was really about basically reclaiming what we Kurds are denied, because we are either denied by our oppressor, our existence is either fully denied, or we're defined by our oppressor. And writing is a way of an act of empowerment, because you now get a pen and you get to talk about yourself. Because when you're talked about in a subjugated manner, where your humanity and your dignity and your power is taken from you. And one of my favorite author, Alice Walker, American novelist, says the easiest way to lose power for people is to think that they have none. And so growing up as a young Kurdish girl, I did grow up with the idea that being stateless, being under such heavy geopolitical oppression, that I lacked power. And it was through writing that I reclaimed my power. I wrote so I could write what has been erased. I wrote to document what has not been documented in an honest manner. I wrote to find my power and my community, and to connect to other Kurdish women who have inspired me, previous generations that have inspired me, and future generations say, we're powerful and we matter. We matter. We matter as much as any other group of humans, even though we don't have a country that we call our own.
Thank you very much. And I believe that message is definitely reflected in your novel. I would like to jump to the second question that we have. On the 23rd of April, libraries celebrate World Book and Copyrights Day, where it's as a library, it's our duty to highlight the importance of reading books. And this has been the case for the past few years. We're in our AUK library, we promote reading culture, and we want to make sure that our students or our AUK community is well aware of what we have in the library, and also read for pleasure. And I believe storytelling is an incredibly effective tool for educating younger generations. I would like to ask about your favorite paragraph in your book, and if you can read it for us, if possible.
Thank you, Golan. I agree with you about the power of storytelling. And just like planting olive trees, you don't see the result immediately. It's not immediate, but the results of reading books is something that ripples through your life and through the life of your kids and so on and so forth. Because even though social media gives us instant gratification, it's like having fast food, and you can't have fast food for the rest of your life. You need gourmet food, and books and literature nourish our souls. It's what feeds us as human. It's what connects us to our humanity. And so I respect and honor the fact that you're celebrating this day. As for my favorite paragraph, it's a really tough question. I don't think I have a favorite paragraph because I worked hard on every word and every sentence. But I'll be delighted to read a paragraph from the prologue. I think it has to do with the theme of the novel and also with the cover, Schler and the flower and the back. The sun had suntered down, disappeared behind Lake Zrebar. A dozen shades of red burst open along the horizon. Below, the narrow winding asphalt road was the hem around the hill's green skirt, embroidered with clusters of red and yellow wildflower. The Schler flowers stood elegant and tall, flourishing across the rough Kurdistan plateau, defying borders. I yearned to be a Schler, but I was a garden of anguish, of loathing, of torment. My occupied homeland was the birthplace of death. I stood up, my breath now coming in pants. I wasn't hiding anymore. Bessa, Bess, I shouted. It's enough. Enough.
Well, this was actually one of the I would say paragraph that touched me personally when I was reading your book. And what made me so happy after finishing your your book, your novel, was knowing that there are actually women even in real life fighting for what's right, just like the main characters, Shider, Joanna, and Layla. And I think in different paragraphs that message was reflected. So I would like to, a follow-up question: what inspired you to write this novel, particularly focusing on experiences of a Kurdish girl navigating sexism and ethnic hatred?
So I wanted to keep that spirit of resistance alive. One thing, through writing, and the other thing was to bear witness to what not talk about that often. I mean, Kurdish women are my heroes because they fight on so many different levels, of the state chauvinism, nationalism, of the states ruling over us, the patriarchy within our own culture. We fight poverty, we fight war, we fight so many obstacles that are on our path. And also look at the range and the spectrum of Kurdish women. I mean, when ISIS attacks, who do they get as their slaves? Kurdish women. And who saves this other Kurdish women? Kurdish women. Just look at the spectrum of the reality that is to be a Kurdish woman. There is a lot of injustice, but there's also a lot of resistance and a lot of power. And as a young Kurd, it was really easy to be focused on and to be reminded of what's missing and what's lacking and what's wrong. But there came a moment in my life when I wanted to see, okay, what is right? What is beautiful? What is powerful? What is unique about being a Kurd? And that's really the Barkhodan Jiana, which we have lived with. I mean, any part of Kurdistan, you look, men or women, we have never given up. We have always resisted in so many different ways. And it's not just resistance, we have resisted through art, through knowledge, through academic work, through parliamentarian work. And to keep that spirit alive was, and to bear witness to the difficulties and the challenges and the untold story, really to tell this untold stories, because stories humanize, stories make us, three-dimensional. And I knew that my audience in North America have probably rarely ever heard of Kurds, that this might be their first time that they pick up a book about Kurds, but I really wanted them to not be inspired to look up more books by Kurds and to be connected to this reality and to be inspired by our resistance. I mean, here's the thing about life. I look at the life of my American students in this beautiful, wealthy California, right? Do you think they're happy? Do you think they go about life thinking, oh my God, this is so awesome, I'm American? No, They're 18-year-old to 22-year-old, and their lives are full of challenges and full of difficulties, right? The problem is that they don't have this Kurdish courage and resistance and resilience to rely on, right? To fall back on. And that's what I had. And just getting perspective and understanding how much power there is in being Kurdish was life-changing. And so bearing witness to the injustice and to the power was my mandate for writing that book, which took me 10 years.
I think that what you just explained for us, for me, was reflected in one line that was just stayed with me when I was even I finished the book, was when it says no, it doesn't matter how you live, how long you live, but how you actually live.
Yeah, yes, definitely. We don't have to look at the West to find heroes. We could just look at our own culture, our own folklore, our own visionary poets, and see that they have been sending us these messages, you know, from almost Diamond to Sherko Bekas to anyone look at, they are telling us that
I would like to also ask if there were any specific moments in your book that hold a particular significance to you, where you felt like you were part of that story or that scene. I would say, was it like either personal or in terms of larger themes explored?
Um, Heartbreaking for me was when Chia is taken to the gallows. And there is this really desperate and sad moment. I was actually crying and sobbing when I wrote that scene. And then I decided that I'm not going to do this. I mean, I remembered Said Raza in Bakur that when they executed him, they held the rope and put it on his own neck. So they denied them the joy of putting the rope on his neck. And that's the last moment you can do, right? And there is so much power in that. And I wanted Chia to do something like that. So the first thing I did was I had him start distributing chocolate. So the last taste in their mouth when they leave this world is a pleasant taste, you know, the taste of chocolate. And then I had him and other Kurds, as they're being hanged, to start singing Kesnale Kurd Mirzwa, Kesnale Kurd Mirzwa. To me, that was the ultimate that a powerless person can do to reclaim and regain power. And those people who executed them, they have no idea what it means, Kesnale Kurd Mirzwa. But the truth is, they live in us, right? They continue to live within us. And when I die, I will continue to live through young Kurds who will be writing their own novel and their own poetry and getting international recognition. So in that way, we continue to go on. I mean, I just watched, well, I actually screened Kazım Oz's uh, movie, beautiful movie, The Life of a Snowflake. And he has a line in that movie that said, our lives as Kurds who resist is very short, just as short span as the life of a snowflake. He says, I am the destiny of the country whose names has been erased, and that's why our lives is as short as snowflake and as long as eternity. So I wrote that book several years ago, but last week when I was showing my student in America this beautiful movie and this line came up, I realized that was also in my consciousness. You know, I think this is in the consciousness of a lot of Kurdish authors and professors and writers and artists that we can live till eternity if we stick to our dignity, if we live as dignified Kurds. And that's what Shia did for me, at least. Yeah.
Yes, well, Chia has his letters actually left effect, I would say, once they went public while he was in prison. Therefore, I would like to move to the another paragraph in chapter 15, which I also wanted to ask you, but there was also a high demand that I ask this question. So I'm going to read that paragraph from the book. And if you can elaborate a little bit for us on the destiny that Layla had. Layla writes while she's in the hospital after her brother visits her. And she writes in the notebook he gave her. She writes, I write so my brother and I can understand how much our destiny was shaped before eggs and sperm united to make us. Because if I don't tell our story, how can I understand why Chia is following in Baba's footsteps? With his increasing activism, how the prison guards who tortured Baba torment me too, what it means to belong to a stateless people, so crushed under the tyrant that self-sabotage has become routine. How can I ever be free if I don't fight for my fearless prison guards?
It's a really good question, Goran. So it's not written in a fatalistic way, it's written in a realistic way. So Leila is born Kurdish, and what do you do with that fact? You know, we all know it's very difficult to be a Kurd in this world. Every Kurd knows that. I mean, when Sheko Beka said, "Tell God to come down and be a Kurd for one day," that I think that resonates with all of us. And yet, there are two obstacles in addition to external oppression that Leila faces. And one of them is when she talks about a stateless nation so um, bent under tyrannies that self-sabotage has become routine, that hints at the psychology of the oppressed. Any oppressed group you look at in the world, you know, from Aboriginal people to Black people to like people suffering gender oppression, it's part of human psychology to turn it against each other. You know, unfortunately, that's a really sad part of the reality that then we become each other's enemy, so much so that the oppressor can, you know, can take a break. It doesn't even have to continue. So that self-sabotage is prevalent in Kurdish community as it is in any oppressed community in the world. And that's the moment where we see Leila's father, who is supposed to protect her and support her and raise her, becomes her main source of oppression. And the other aspect is when Leila uses the word the faceless prison guard. And the faceless prison guard is the obstacles that she has within herself. Now it's no longer external, it's internal. And as we see, Schleer has fewer of those obstacles, but Schleer was nourished by Joanna. So because of the family nourishment and that she received, that she can thrive. She has fewer inner obstacles. Whereas Leila is really alone in this world and she doesn't have any parental support, and therefore she has a lot of faceless prison guards within herself. And that's what the novel is about. Leila is a woman not as strong as Schler, but someone who contemplates suicide in the beginning of the novel, and then she ends up becoming a filmmaker. So it's about her journey from absolute powerlessness to now finding her own power and her own art.
Right. I would say Leila goes from this lady who cooks and cleans at home to become an activist and also a voice for the voiceless. How do you think books, especially your book, contribute to cultural understanding of empathy, especially across different backgrounds and perspectives?
Golan, I wrote in isolation for 7 years. No one knew I was writing a book. I didn't know it would be published or it would gain success. But now that it's been out there for a few years, it has sold thousands of copies. And I have received so many emails and letters from people who say, you know, again, North Americans are very disconnected with Kurdish reality, unfortunately. I think unlike Europeans, where they say, you know, I am ashamed that I didn't know this, but now I know. And I think the way that shift happens, again, being very slow, if you deal with American politicians and expect them to support the Kurds, they either won't actually listen to you because of the influence that Turkey and other places have on US policy, um, or they want to, or they don't want to, or they want, but they cannot. But if you reach the heart of ordinary Americans, because of the democracy that's here, politicians, legislator, representative, they pay attention to what Americans care about, right? So in order to gain their votes, they will address whatever the concern their constituents are. So when you create a bridge between the heart of Kurdistan and the heart of American people, then these people pressure their politicians in a way that lobbying would not have been successful. So it's a very long way of making change, but I think for every Kurdish artist that has an exhibition in America, for every Kurdish movie that is screened in America, for every Kurdish book that is loved by American people, we become closer and closer to making real political change in the world.
I would like to ask about what has been the toughest criticisms you have received as an author, and what has been the best compliment?
So sometimes Americans are frustrated with Leila. They think she lacks agency. They don't understand that it's not agency that she lacks. She really lacks option. That in Rojava specifically, I mean, Iran is a place of gender apartheid, right? So how many options does Layla actually has in life? But a lot of Americans don't understand that because they do have a lot of options here and they feel like Layla could also, do something, but she can't. She really can't. And that is a bit harsh to know that they just can't think beyond their own privileges when they look at the reality of Kurdish people. Um, and in terms of the best compliment, well, I wrote this book for Kurdish women and it's dedicated to Kurdish women. And so when a Kurdish woman like yourself tells me, it felt like part of my own life was in this book, or I feel seen through this book, I feel heard through this book. That really means the world to me because that's what I set out to do. I was hoping that there will be several other Kurdish women who feel like they have a home in this book. I grew up not having any representation in world literature. And there is something very important about being seen, to see yourself on the pages of a novel in global literature and to see yourself on the screen. They say you can't be what you can't see, right? So to see yourself reflected in literature is very, very important. I looked at world literature and I saw that, oh my God, no one has written Kurdish women into literature. And I decided, you know what? We Kurdish women will do it ourselves. We will write ourselves into literature. So when other Kurdish women see that, and when they set out to do the same thing, when young Kurds reach out to me and say, "Can you mentor me? Can you get me help get published?" I realize that this momentum is going. We are writing ourselves into global literature, and that matters. That's very important.
Well, it's definitely a great piece, and for me, when I was reading the book, I was able to travel to different part to Kurdistan in different countries because I myself was born and raised in Kurdistan region, and I didn't really have much knowledge about Kurdistan part of Iran. So that was definitely an eye opener. And I believe I would say this book definitely a must read book, and I have been already recommending to a lot of friends and colleagues. I would like to ask you if you meet Layla in person, if you walk in a coffee shop, what would you tell her today?
I think I would tell her that you're okay. Stop beating yourself up. That you matter, and you're important and significant and beautiful, and you have carried a very difficult burden. Um, but sometimes great souls sign up for hard tasks. So um, take pride in being Kurdish. I would encourage her to support other Kurdish talents and other Kurdish activists and artists. And I would tell her, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay.
Very nice. I wanted to ask this question to to anyone who read this book because I also feel like I have my answer.
We do have a lot of talents now that I teach here. I make sure I introduce Kurdish, novelists. I teach Shirko Bekes, I teach Kurdish filmmakers and all of that. And now that I'm looking, I discover them. So we're here. It's just, I don't know why as a community we don't support each other as much. I wish we did, but I wanted to remind you that we actually absolutely have a lot of fantastic Kurds in the world, but they're working without any support from the community, without any recognition from the community. I mean, I've had thousands of events across North America, and I've barely met maybe 20 Kurds. They never show up for my events. I'm here, I'm writing for them, I'm representing them, and they don't show up. So I just want to remind us there are a lot of inspiring Kurds out there. We just need to reach out to each other and
Absolutely, and to support each other at the same time. Is there any specific thing you would like the readers to take away from your book?
not really. I think readers get their own takeaway, bringing their own personal experiences into writing a novel. And that's the beauty of novel, because unlike a movie, you're not seeing a director's imagination. Readers bring in their own imaginations that they co-create with the author, and that's the power of literature. I don't have anything specific that I want people to take away. It's just delightful for me that for the duration of the time that they're reading, whether it takes them 12 hours or 10 hours or 15 hours, that they get to be a Kurd for 12 hours of their lives. And I think to me that's transformational.
Thank you very much. I will pass the mic to Dr. Gior Aghapouri, the director of the Center for Peace and Human Security and also assistant professor of the International Studies at College of Art and Science at AUK. He has a couple of questions to ask.
Yeah. Good afternoon and good morning. Hello, Ms. Ava Homa Slaures. It's great to be meeting with you here again, and thank you to AUK Library for organizing such a great event. Actually, I got answer for some of my questions while you were talking, so I know I can skip some of them because I've already got. But something that I still it just touched upon my mind, is this notion, in on 16th of September 2022, we had a massive demonstration, protest, or revolution or movement, whatever we call it, in Roshalat, which started from Roshalat with the slogan of Jinjian Azadi, Women, Life, Freedom. And Miss Homa also she mentioned some of the notion that which even in her book, which may still be available in the movement of Jinjian Azadi. My first question, I wanted to relate it to this movement actually. If as Ava Homa, as an author, as a Kurdish woman writing from diaspora. First, I want her to tell us more about this sort of intersectionality in this movement. If we compare a Kurdish movement taking part in that protest with an Iranian woman, what would each of them would represent, or what would the request? What will the request be different? If there's different, what are these differences? This is the second question, maybe would be related to her writing actually. So Ava Homa wrote this book when she was still closer to Kurdistan, especially to Roshalat, not but after some years of living in diaspora, because I have also lived in diaspora and my work partially are related to diaspora and migration. And this is something that we can see from most of the Kurdish authors and even artists when they leave homeland. They're like, they're saying that they say that art is like a tree. When you take it apart, when you uproot that, you may not be able to be connected to that society. So will Ava Homa be able to write another novel again, considering the thing that the social and political developments that happened in especially in Roshalat? And because of time, I think these two questions are enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aghapouri. It's an honor to speak with you. Let me start with your second question because it's fresh in my mind. You're very true. You're very right that art can get uprooted, but so are people. I mean, we people in diaspora are uprooted. We don't have the same roots that people in Kurdistan have. And that's painful, but it also gives you perspective. I have completed another novel that's also about the Kurdish experience. I have sent it to my agent. So I think for the rest of my life, I will continue to write Kurdish stories, whether there are Kurdish stories that happen entirely back home or partly in diaspora. I see myself as a Kurdish caller, but the call that I have, the bar that I have on my back is cultural. So it's storytelling because that's what I know how to do. There is so much that I can't do as one individual, but I'm a storyteller and I think it's very important to tell Kurdish stories. Very, very important. Um, so some things you lose some things by being away from Kurdistan, but it's very important that you now have a global perspective, that you don't see Kurdish experience as isolated. It was only after leaving Kurdistan that I understood how, in some way, our experience is related to what people in Bosnia or what people in Rwanda experienced. And lo and behold, my book was just translated into Bosnian language, and I'm invited to go there in July to speak to Bosnian people about the Kurdish experience, right? So there's a lot that I lose by being away from home, but there's a lot that I also gain by being away from home. I think it's also true for a lot of artists. I think for filmmaker, it's a lot more difficult to be in diaspora, but because I sit and write in my isolation, and because I have access to YouTube, and because I do video WhatsApp chat with my family in Kurdistan all the time, I do have some kind of virtual access. It's not real access, but I do have some kind of virtual access. So it's not much, but that's what one individual can do. And I am committed to carry this bar to continue to be a cultural coilbearer for Kurdistan for as long as I can. And your first question was about the movement in Rojhelat, and I think it was on some levels, on social level, it was an important movement, because it's like, so Kurds in Rojhelat have been against the Islamic Republic since the beginning, since the very beginning. But 44 years ago, when Kurds stood up against the Islamic regime, what did the rest of Iran do? They completely ignored the Kurdish cause. For God's sake, I mean, in Mashhad, we had Lashkar Piyadeh, Imam Zaman. They were volunteer militia who would come to Kurdistan to kill us, right? Now compare that to what happened 2 years ago, when it's like Iran had a moment of awakening when they realized we can't do this without Kurds. We don't know how to organize. We're not as brave as Kurds. They're very important to our freedom and our liberation. Now, this awakening is not perfect. There's still a lot of fear, there's still a lot of division, but it's very important if you compare to what happened in just 4 decades. And again, being a writer, book takes me 6 years. I look at things in longer perspective, and I don't look at immediate results of things. And in terms of Kurdish women's movement and Iranian women's movement, so in Rojhelat, I have been affected by both. Both of these movements started a century ago. Iranian women have been fighting for their rights for over a century. And Kurdish women in 1919 had their first organization in Istanbul. So this is also a parallel. So to me, they were parallel sister movements. Now, in terms of legislation, Iranian women's movement had more effect on me. In terms of inspiration, Kurdish movement had more effect on me, because I can turn to any Kurdish woman, like in Golan, that we have just met, and she understands what it's like to be woman and to be Kurdish. I can look at the most remarkable Iranian woman activist. She understands what it's like to be a woman. She has no understanding of what it's like to be Kurdish, right? So I felt really a lot more connected to Kurdish women's movement. And then in 2022, suddenly they merged through Jinjian Azadi, and it gained a lot of momentum and a lot of power. So it's my hope is that these two sister movements continue to empower each other and appreciate each other and bring about momentum, real momentum.
Great, thank you very much.
You're muted.
Yes, I would like to. You reminded me of a very important, actually, activity that I happened to pass by in my time in DC. So it was the time where the movement was all the Gina Amini and all those protests happening in the US. I was working somewhere like 4 minutes walk away from the White House, and I had the opportunity to witness the protests in front of the White House. And I found a lot of, I would say, signage by the protesters that were pretty interesting. So one of them that I found was Iranian women do not need to be saved, but the government need to stop protecting their colors. So the woman who was holding the sign, and I stopped her. I said, all women, not only Iranian women. And when you say Iranian women, you're forgetting about other women. That's also highlighted in your book as well, when it says how hard it's, and women and Kurdistan are very much alike.
Same line, I just want to add something. I have been writing a paper, it's under review at the moment, and it's related to this discussion that we have. So it's an ethnography, online ethnography of 6 months during the social media on Gina's movement. So the notion is that Gina or Mahsa, just these two names. Why Kurds insist on using Gina and the Iranians or Persians insist on naming her Mahsa. And then this is going through a study of identity transformation. So I've named it from coexistence to confrontation. It started the Gina movement sparked. It was for the first time, as Ms. Hava mentioned, that the Iranian, both women and also activists, they started to know about Kurdistan at the beginning. But unfortunately, during the process, it started to turn down, and this coexistence turned into the confrontation. And again, lots of ideas and identities came up. So that's if it's published, I will share with you. So it might be related to this topic as
Please
well.
do.
Sorry
Please do
for
share it with me. I would.
being out of the
No,
yeah.
Yeah, well,
no, that's.
yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say I would love to read it. Thanks for your research. And there was one of the moments. So, Gulan, when you asked me what was the most rewarding moment, one of the things that happened was three Iranian Persian women actually wrote to me and said, you know what? I grew up in Iran. I thought I knew Kurds because I've always liked Kurds. I've had Kurdish friends. But by God, now I know how much I didn't know and I'm ashamed. You know, that sense of reckoning, that shame, that gosh, I thought I knew Kurds, but I didn't because they don't have representation was so meaningful to me. And I think this movement, it brought up confrontation as well, but I think something shifted in the consciousness of Iranian society that's pretty valuable and has to be studied.
I was also talking about the name of Mahsa and also Gina. I was actually fortunate enough to be participating in one of the conferences by Vital Voices in Washington, D.C. in October 2022. They kept talking about different women, and when it came to talk about Gina, I was all of a sudden she was Mahsa everywhere, even in the protesters. So the person who came on the stage, she said Gina Amini instead of Mahsa, and she was identified. And I was so proud. And she followed by Xinjiang Azadi. I think that was the moment where I felt very proud because, I looked around, I told my, because my people around me asked, who is like Gina? I said, well, Gina is her Kurdish real name. Mahsa is her, Iranian name.
That acknowledgement is so important. And that's the difference between stealing, cultural appropriation, and cultural appreciation, right? And it's unfortunately missing. I saw a prominent Iranian woman in The Guardian writes about women life freedom. And in this long article, there is not even a moment when she mentions that Xinjiang Azadi is a Kurdish protest and a Kurdish slogan and has roots in years of Kurdish resistance. So failing that as a feminist, failing to mention that to me is really significant. It means you're not a true social justice person. If you see gender oppression but fail to see ethnic oppression, there is something wrong with your activism. And it could be just something as small as a Kurdish slogan, just that in parentheses, just that awareness, that mentioning the word Jina. I mean, for God's sake, even etymologically, the word Jina is connected to Xinjiang Azadi. How can you deny that and forget that? Why are you afraid of acknowledging that? Like, look at yourself and see what creates this fear in you.
Due to the time constraints, I would like to pass on to Ms. Helbeen, who's going to ask you some questions that were submitted by the readers of your book and people from the AUK community. Helbeen, please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, I'm Helbeen. Hi, Ava. Nice to meet you. Hi, Dr. Ziar and Gulan. I also wanted to express how impactful your book has been for me. As someone who wasn't born and raised here, reading your novel was both eye-opening and painful, I must admit. It made me realize how little I actually knew about the experience of the oppressed Kurds in Iran. And even though it is a fictional novel, I learned much by reading it because your narrative also blends with facts, with fiction, and then showcasing the everyday lives of Kurds, the struggles, the continued persecution. So I wanted to thank you for this novel and for shedding light on such an important subject. And now I'm excited to ask some questions on behalf of the AUK community. We have received some great questions from our readers. So let's start with the first question. What is the importance of the title Daughters of Smoke and Fire in relation to the story?
So, Helbin, I'm really happy to be speaking with you, and I appreciate your kind comments on the book. Like I said, I wrote this for Kurdish women, and when I hear things like this from you, it means a lot to me. So, thank you. As for the title, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, daughters, because I talk about female experience, it's a feminist book. Smoke and fire because I think as Kurds we are children of fire. That's why we have survived all this oppression and genocide and cultural genocide. We are made of fire. We are resisting. It's our nature. but smoke because of oppression and because of patriarchy. So when you look at Layla's journey, it goes from being stuck in the smoke and being suffocated by the smoke to finally find the power that is within her and outside of her as a Kurdish woman.
Thank you. A lot of our readers were curious about your journey as an author and what motivated to write such an intriguing novel. We have covered that but I also want to know what was the writing process like for you and how you felt during this time.
So there's a there is a difference between being a writer and an author. You know, as even as a young kids, without having a notion that I'm going to be an author or I'm going to get published, I wrote every day, and it was just my way of orienting myself to the world. Like if I don't ever get published again, I'm still going to write every day because I find myself through storytelling and I connect to the world through writing. I mean, writing is the act of digging and digging and digging and digging, and you go deep within yourself and you find both your demons and your treasures. So there is nothing that you can compare to the power of writing, especially for an oppressed woman. Like what it does to you, it's very transformational. And also what it does in terms of when you find your place in the world and you claim your place. Like I am one individual and I'm Kurdish and I'm female, but I'm important and this is my space and this is my place and this is my world. In terms of getting published, though, it's a completely different process. It's extremely difficult to get published in North America, partly because people don't buy books as much as they used to. People don't read books as much as they used to because of social media. So the industry is struggling. The other part is capitalism, where the publishers are making more and more and more money, and authors are making less and less money, and how it has affected the industry. You know, some people who are really talented, they never get published, and instead, this and that famous person who doesn't know what to write, who has nothing to write, has nothing to say, they get published because publishers are expecting to make money. So unfortunately, it's a very messed up industry because of capitalism. And it takes a very long time also. You can't, if you want to get published. So when you talk about getting published, you could self-publish, which will be more work, but easier and take less time. You could like get published in 6 months. You could go with small houses. My first book, Echoes from the Other Land, was a collection of short stories. And I went with a small house that were very supportive, very loving, very caring. I really enjoy working with them, but they can print your book, but they don't have the power to send your book to bigger places. And if you don't get reviewed, if you don't, how are you going to get recognized? So many books are getting published here, and people don't hear about them because the publisher doesn't have the power. For my novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, I wanted to get published with one of the top publishers. And this is one reason that the book got recognition, but it's very hard because they won't look at you unless you have a literary agent. And a literary agent takes a couple of years to find. And then your agent takes a couple of years to find a publisher for you. And then publisher will sign a contract with you today, and your book is going to come out in 2026. So it's a very, very lengthy process, unfortunately. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Building on that, what was the biggest challenge during this publication process?
So there are a lot of gatekeepers. There are a lot of people who don't care about the value of stories or storytelling. It's all about how much money are you going to make us? Unfortunately, these gatekeepers are also very racist. And they look at someone like me and say, she's a woman from Middle East. She has no capabilities. She has no talent. She doesn't matter. And so facing racism, like actual racism, I actually had people that would tell me, why are you even trying to write in English? Just go write in Kurdish, which wasn't in a way of value your own culture kind of tone. It was just like, you know, a very dismissive way of looking at it. And the other thing is, um, you spend so many hours a day writing a book that can compete in this extremely competitive environment. And yet you basically make no money off of it. And so now I have to teach and other writers do other things. And so the question is when you're working full time, right, and you're giving all your energy to your job, and working full time in America is really, really hard. How are you going to find time for your art. Because if you give the best of yourself to your job, what's gonna remain for your art? So financial challenges, racism, capitalism have been my challenges.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. It sounds like quite a process. The next question would be, could you discuss the proofreading process? And following this process, did you find it necessary to make any revisions or adjustments to ensure that the text accurately conveyed the intended meaning?
Right, so that's another good question. So editing happens on three levels. The first level is developmental edits, which means a publisher likes your book and says, okay, I'm going to publish this, but I'm going to check for the story. There might be plot holes in the story. There might be a paragraph that's underdeveloped. There might be a paragraph that's overdeveloped. There might be a verb that's not the right verb. So they go through the process of making sure the story works from beginning to end, that it works as a whole. And because it's like 400 pages and you as an author are really close to this text, there are things that you don't see. And then the publisher sees them and works with you on the story. That's one stage of editing. The second stage of editing is copy editing. One is just for language. It's not about the story anymore. It's just making sure, all the verbs are the right tense and like all the language is clear and all of that. That's called copy editing. And then the third level is proofreading. Proofreading is really just about making sure every comma is in the right place, the formatting is good, the font is good. It's more like superficial but really important stages of editing. So when you're working with a publisher on the developmental edit, you have to make sure it's the story that you want, that it's a coherent story. You can make changes to the story. Second level, you can make changes to the language, but when it comes to proofreading, you can't change much. That's like you've lost your chance. It's pretty much done. Maybe you can change one word, maybe you can change one punctuation, but you can't really change much. And the second part of your question, how do you make sure about your intended meaning? You have to pick your battle. There are sections that there is no way how much you try to explain. An American mind would not understand this complex Kurdish reality, right? So what are you going to do? How many battles are you going to pick? How many fights are you going to have with your editor? I mean, there's a section in the book with Alan witnessing the massacre. I actually had to fight for that. My Canadian publisher said it's too gruesome, it's too harsh for people to read it. And I said, you know what? Kurds have lived that for years. Your readers can live through it for 5 pages. It's just 5 pages. I'm not going to take it out. And there were times that I said, you know what? Yes, I'll work with you. So you have to be very careful. You have to sit with every suggestion they make and make important decisions and to see what you can take out, what you can leave there, what's very important to you, what you can live without.
Thank
That's
you
why
for
it
this
takes years.
detail. Yeah. And now to our final question. In your book, there's a line where Layla says, I believe food changes taste and texture based on the energy that flows between the people eating. Do you think Layla's idea is valid, and how might negative energy affect this dynamic, particularly in toxic environments?
So, so Schler and Leila, they're having a meal together. Schler is not a super sensitive person. So for Schler, it wouldn't matter who's there. She's going to enjoy her food. Whereas Leila is very sensitive. So she is vulnerable, but she would notice things like that. And it's also scientifically been proven that before our thoughts have this, waves and vibrations that affects things. It has been studied with plants that if you put a plant in a home and give it water and its exposure to the sun, but there's tension in that home versus joy in that home, it affects plants. So it's a reality. It affects molecules, our mentality, our thoughts. So there's power to our thoughts because before we take action, we verbalize it as speech. Before we verbalize it, we think it, right? So we can't undermine and not pay attention to the power of thoughts, which is what creates. And that's what Layla is talking about. It. She's been really lonely. Her mother is gone. She's trying to connect with her father, and it's very limited, her connection to her father. So when Schler comes over, she's enjoying it much more, and she's trying to express herself. She's basically trying to tell Schler, food tastes better when you're around, but she goes around it. She doesn't directly say it to Shler.
Thank you so much, Ava, for sharing your expertise with us and taking the time to answer our questions. Now I will hand over to Ms. Golan.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you very much, Helbeen. This is, I think, the end of our session. I would like to thank you very much for your time and also talking about your novels and sharing your knowledge and thoughts with our UK community. We're again very much, I was trying to moderate the session. Is there anything you would like to pass it to students to encourage them and motivate them to read more? And also, as you said, is you have to have something that will feed your mind and also give a deeper meaning to, you know, daily life. So is there anything you would like to pass it to students?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell your students that you're more important than you think, to not give your power away. You have a lot of power. It's very difficult to be a Kurd in this world, but there's also a lot of spirit of courage and resistance that we have inherited from our ancestors that people are missing. They're lacking. You know, I see it in my American students. So take pride in who you are, because it's very easy to fall into despair. It's very easy to fall into constantly criticizing yourself and others. So start by being kind to yourself and appreciating your power and reclaiming your power, and then share that power with every Kurd that you ever come across. And that's how we will thrive as a nation, because our oppressor will never do that for us. We have to do that for ourselves and for each other.
Thank you very much, Alvan. I think it's very important for all of us to remember that. And I would like to thank Dr. Gior, Helbeen, and Miss Media. We look forward to seeing your next book, and I hope we will be able to also talk about your next novel. And please do let us know when it's published to ensure that it's available in our library and displayed on our shelves.
Well, it would be at least 3 more years, but I will let you know. And I wanted to say it was a true pleasure to talk with all of you, Golan, Helbeen, Dr. Gior, Media, and to the AUK community. I'm honored and I'm humbled to have had this opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Ms. Golan, as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for organizing this event. Thank you, Ava. And we're looking forward to having you here in Kurdistan next time. Hopefully, we could have you at our department also, and having more sessions in person.
Thank you, Dr. Gior. I hope that will happen. I would love to visit Kurdistan.
Thank you again and have a good day.